This is the Existentialism lecture video, and we're going to discuss the basic philosophical concepts of this idea. This information comes from Tom Drake at the University of Idaho, and my name is Jenny Van Dyke, and I'm presenting it today. Sartre said that man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. We're going to discuss this idea as we go through the basic philosophical concepts of this. A basic definition of existentialism is that existence precedes essence. This strictly material, scientific, rational view of existence, of life on this planet, carries the following implications. We exist, period, without any more meaning or purpose than any other organism, like an amoeba or a bacteria. We are born, we have evolved as a species, we exist as organisms, the product of random biophysical chance. There is no inherent, larger, essential meaning to life, or at least there is no evidence of such a meaning. There is just random existence itself. All essence or meaning follows after this fact. The fact of our existence, thus, existence precedes essence. There is no innate human nature. That is to say, there is no innate human essence. Thus, there is no innate ultimate set of truths. Thus, there is no innate universal morality. Truths and morality are simply ideology or useful fictions. Thus, life itself is totally inherently meaningless when measured against the vastness of the universe and space and time. But it also seems equally clear that mankind, as an individual or as a culture, a nation, a planet, cannot survive in a meaningless world. We as individuals and as communities cannot exist as nihilists, which are people who believe in nothing. That is, without belief, humans and humanity cannot function. Existentialism is, then, a philosophical and literary movement attempting to confront the nihilist implications of modernism, or the modern condition, and by confronting it, to rise above it. These are some basic premises and principles of existential philosophy: the absurd, freedom, total responsibility, and then despair, anxiety, and angst. And we're going to talk about how all those work together. First is the absurd. Because modern man cannot locate an overarching meaning to human existence, life itself is therefore inherently absurd. It makes no sense. It defies reason. In the end, regardless of our heroism, love, efforts, we all die. All meaning is essentially meaningless. The greatest work of art today will be utterly forgotten 1,000 years from now. Good things happen to bad people. This is another absurdity that existentialists can't get their minds around. So life really makes no sense at all. It is absurd. Another basic principle of existentialism is freedom. This is the flip side of meaninglessness. This lack of God or gods controlling destiny is that we are entirely free. Man alone can determine the course of mankind. No higher source will ever be found to determine what is right versus wrong, the truth, etc. Man alone can create meaning. But if there is any room in this harsh human reality for any meaning at all, it exists strictly and only at a human level, rather than at a cosmic or metaphysical one, and it must be created. The existentialist realizes that even our greatest, most beautiful, most heroic creations live and die with us as individuals, as cultures. Meaning dies with us. If a moral or ethical life or society has any meaning, that meaning dies off with that life or society. Thus, any meaning in our lives, our world would be created through our own free will, fleeting, transitory, individual, subjective, still ultimately meaningless in terms of some ultimate big picture, because there is no bigger picture, according to an existentialist. Existential philosophy asks whether or not it really matters to human beings that there is no ultimate big picture. Does the fact that you and your loved ones only exist for 100 years really negate the value of that life while it is lived. The existentialist says, no, of course not. If this is all the meaning there is, it logically follows it is the only value there is. Thus, it is of the utmost value and importance. Life is rendered more valuable, not less. This is perhaps the most common theme to all existential literature, including pieces that were written thousands of years ago. And that theme is, it is only when we realize that life is brief and fleeting and transitory that it takes on its sweetest meaning and beauty, its value. This theme drives much classical Greek and Renaissance literature. Another basic principle is total responsibility. A lack of inherent or ultimate meaning is not a lack of consequence. We live in a world of cause and effect, and the choices you make will dictate what happens not only to you, but to many around you. With freedom comes responsibility, and with great freedom comes great responsibility. And I'm not quoting Spider-Man here. So if a man is entirely free, then we are also entirely responsible. Man alone must determine what is right versus what is wrong, and we only have ourselves, both at an individual and a societal level, to blame for our problems. Failing to create meaning, morality, laws, etc. will still result in social injustice, suffering, starvation, wars, genocide, you name it. We may or may not, we are free to choose, return to the institutions that have traditionally given mankind meaning: art, love and family, hope, faith, religion, but we do so through free will and choice. We essentially will meaning into existence through choice, action, and creativity. To will something into meaning and yet to accept that life is that and yet to accept that it is meaningless is, of course, totally absurd. It makes no logical sense. But to an existentialist, that's okay. Life doesn't make sense. Existential heroes such as Sisyphus, Achilles, Beowulf, Guido all embrace the absurdity of existence and move on to create the only meaning we will ever know, that which we create ourselves. And the last basic premise that we'll talk about today: despair, anxiety, and angst. Grasping at all of these things above that we've just talked about normally leads people to an existential despair or angst or anxiety. Our lives appear both meaningless, and yet we are still entirely responsible for our lives. Understanding this can often scare us when we realize that we alone are responsible for the course of human events. It's relatively easy to say, well, God has a plan, so those 10 million people that the Nazis killed, or those people who died on 9/11 must have died for a reason. But it is absolutely terrifying to say all those deaths truly occurred simply because we let them, because we chose to let them occur. Thus, we are to blame, and only we can stop this from occurring. And the more we realize that humans are selfish idiots, the more anxiety we are likely to experience. For an existentialist, this is a fact we cannot escape, but must grapple with. Like realizing that you will someday die. It's not a fact that will ever make you happy, but it's still a fact. For an existentialist, you cannot overcome this fact unless you accept or embrace it. A lot of classical existential heroes involve them overcoming their despair to rise and meet his faith in a meaningful way. Existentialism versus nihilism. Nihilism is the belief that nothing matters. Existentialism is the attempt to confront and deal with meaninglessness, to not succumb to nihilism or despair, to not give up or avoid responsibility. So existentialism is the opposite of nihilism. The nihilist says, there is no God, no heaven or hell. There can be no right or wrong. Let's party. The existentialist says, there is no God, no heaven or hell. So you and I alone must figure out how to make life meaningful and good. We must, in fact, work without cosmic aid to figure out what good even is. Some of the early existentialist authors like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy even argue that the only means to battle modern nihilism is to return to tradition and faith. That can be seen in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, which is built around the argument. T.S. Eliot argues the same way. French existentialists such as Camus and Sartre, who I quoted before, they actually explicitly set out to directly refute Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. Camus wanted to disprove Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. So existentialists are looking for a way out of man's inhumanity to man. Our suffering may not have any higher or ultimate cosmological value, but it is suffering nonetheless. Nonetheless, the existentialist says, even if there is no higher meaning, even if existence is ultimately absurd, we are still forced by existence, the fact that we are alive, and chance to live out our days. We cannot blame God for the tragedies. Thus, we must blame ourselves when those occur. And we must look to ourselves to ensure that such horror happens rarely. We're going to listen to a Percy Shelley poem. See if you can find the existential idea in it.
Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, king of kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
So to review, the basic tenets of existentialism: existence precedes essence. Life is inherently absurd. Man alone can create meaning. Man alone is to blame for our problems. Man experiences despair in response to these ideas. Existentialism is not nihilism.